So it's not food. It can't substitute for other food, you know. So when you look at it from that perspective and the seasonality, which was very short, the time frame, and you take out the domesticated stuff, if sugar was the primary fuel, we would have died out as a species.
Oh, for sure.
So that's complete and utter nonsense. It has no basis. Even simple common sense would tell you, based on that knowledge of archaeological knowledge, would tell you that this is impossible to be the primary source of food that fuels the body.
Okay, Harry, again, thanks for joining me, mate. I really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule. You know, time is precious for all of us. But I wanted to get some of the background of your story, and so let's start with what your background is. What do you do?
Oh, what do I do? I sort of started years ago when I was young, in my 20s and all that. I got into IT, so that was my initial field, and also sort of did computer support. Also, for a period of time, I sort of set up a company, and I sort of sold computers as well. But then, sort of as they became a consumer item, it became a bit harder as we moved beyond the 90s. And then I sort of switched after that. I went and did a cabling license and did some cabling work as well for a period of time. And then sort of, you know, unless you get big contracts, it's really hard to sustain that. And, you know, it sort of falls up, you know, you're competing with wireless and stuff like that when it comes to smaller businesses. You know, that Ethernet sort of becomes less viable for smaller organisations. So I sort of been transitioned from there to the current field that I'm in, which is cartography or mapping, the way most people understand it. And so that's currently what my field is and has been for a number of decades now. And I've basically been in the field, what now they call it spatial science, but in this field for well over 30 years. So that's pretty much what I've been doing for most of my life. It's a very technical. I'm basically, even though in the past I've, you know, dabbled in other areas, retail. My father had a corner shop, so from a young age, so I've been in hospitality, retail, and all that as a youngster for most of my life. I always had a technical mindset. I loved, you know, building things and putting things together and working out how they actually work, pulling them apart. Even as a child, I'd tear my toys apart to try and work out how they the ins and outs of them. So I had that mindset from a very young age, and it just started dominating my personality. The rest is history.
Yeah. So how did you get into nutrition then?
Well, back in about 15 years ago, I had a heart attack. So I had complete zero interest in nutrition up until that point. And then after I had a heart attack in my mid-40s, I'm 59 now, and, well, nearly 59, I'll be in September. So at that stage, I'm going, what the hell's going on? My great-grandfather lived to 107. My grandfather died from pneumonia in his late 80s. Dad was still around, and he was in his 70s, mid-70s. He's 90 now. He's beyond 90, but, and I'm going, what am I doing wrong? Why did this happen to me? There's no genetics in the family. My auntie, youngest, she's in her 80s, still alive. Mum's older sister, she died 87, but not from any disease. Just basically she choked to death at 87. It was just one of she had a habit of eating very fast. She could scoff down things so fast. She was one of those people that had that sort of a personality. My, uncle, mum's brother, he lived to 93. So it just didn't make sense to me why the hell I would be suffering cardiovascular disease at the age of 44. It just, there's no history in the family. There's none whatsoever. My cholesterol tended to be, even now that I'm on a sort of more carnivorous diet, it doesn't tend to be, like super high. I'm not a hyper responder whatsoever. It tends to be in the, 4 to 5s. It's not like high, and even in the past, it's always been in the 4 to 5s, even whatever diet. So it's sort of consistently there, genetically determined at those levels. So it never, none of the narratives or the stuff that I was told made any sense to me. So initially, I sort of followed the guidelines like everybody does. For about 6 months, I was on statins and a whole lot primarily, and taking an aspirin in the morning and stuff like that, as the recommendation is. And I had a few incidences where I went into hospital, and it was more related to the operation. Ripping your chest apart doesn't, can actually create a lot of side effects after the healing. You get nerve endings firing and stuff like that. You can get all sorts of funny symptoms, and obviously each time I went in wasn't a problem. Did all the stress tests and all that, fine. So it was confusing. I was angry, annoyed with a system that had no answers. And I said, if you guys, idiopathic, as I call them, not idiopathic, as they claim that they don't know the cause, I reverse the Latin on them and I call them idiopathic. That's what they are. Because, you'd think, okay, you guys have spent all this money. Why isn't it? But then you realise, once you do these deep dives, you realise the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, all these vested interests deliberately undermining the research, and deliberately pushing certain narratives, and are deliberately designing studies in a way to create either inverse relationships which don't make sense, or deliberately mislead. So, but it took me a while to realise that. But initially, when I, a year after my heart disease, I sort of got into basically doing a deep dive, and came across Weston A. Price, like a lot of people back in 2010s, back then, in that sort of era. Paleo was big, so I got sort of in the paleo. Then I got a whole lot of arrhythmias and stuff like that. I realised, this really isn't working for me. I know now that basically I've got calcium genetics, so I don't absorb very well because I've got pastoral background. About 24% of the population do have these genetics in the Eurasia sort of region, and tend to require more calcium intake. Eating dairy primarily, that's the main source, the animal source. And so once then I shifted to a low carb diet. I noticed my arrhythmias went away. So that was sort of, and I was sort of in and out of low carb. I wasn't sort of convinced 100%. I was still struggling with a lot of cognitive dissonance. But I just kept on looking at the research and coming across I came across a study that was done back in 2005 by Christopher Gartner, a Vagoon academic from Stanford University. But at least he actually did, a study on it was called the A to Z study. So covered Ornish. Ornish gave him a lot of stick on that study. Atkins, Ornish, Zone, and the learned sort of diet of the Dietetics Association.
Yeah.
And pretty much all those were very similar to each other. And the one that stood out was Atkins. It, just absolutely blitzed them. And I'm going, okay. And then I came across the Israeli study, the direct study. So these were, the Israeli study was even longer compared to the A to Z study, which was only done for a year. And compliance was pretty good for first 6 months. And then you could see that even the Atkins group started increasing their carb intake to 30%. So it was less low carb in that regard. And, I go, okay, these people, after 6 months, they don't do as well when they're actually back consuming more carbs. Maybe that's the problem. And then, the direct study in Israel showed as well something very similar. They basically they actually provided the food at the Winona, the nuclear facility in Israel. So they actually did about a 2-year, and then they had a follow-on up to 5 years. And so it was quite clear that the low carb, which was an issue, and even they did a 3-prong type, 3 diets. It was initially it was going to be just the learn diet of the dietetics, the one, but a modified version, which was done by Harvard. And then the other one was the high-fat Mediterranean diet. Because a lot of people have done, low-fat, but traditionally, in Israel, places like that in Greece, it's more of a high-fat. Same thing is, more animal foods. So they were doing that and doing a comparison. And then the 6 months prior to I think it was 6 months or a year prior to the study, additional funding was provided at the last minute. I don't know why. An academic that was involved she was from Harvard. She basically wanted to add the Atkins diet as well because it was sort of popular at the time. And she wanted to basically prove that it was bad. And so they added it too, and the Atkins diet blitzed both the other diets, and the high fat, which is more animal based, Mediterranean diet came in second, even against the learned diet, and in some areas it was equal to the Atkins diet. So it wasn't what they were expecting, and it was actually better controlled than the study done by Stanford University by the Vagoon. Christopher Gartner, or he was an associate professor at the time. Now he's a full professor, he was doing garlic studies prior to that, which is ridiculous. But anyway, so when they they looked at the data, it was it just really confirmed that animal foods have some sort of effect. But as I was going to say, the importance was that they were providing the lunch meal and foods for the evening meal that they took with them. So I think they only had to do their own breakfast, but which they encouraged them to do bacon and eggs and stuff like that for the Atkins end and whatever the other diets required. So, it was quite clear that these nutritional studies, trials as they were at the time, these were randomized trials. Obviously, they weren't controlled. They were epidemiological randomized trials, but they were told by nutritionists that these are the foods you require to eat on the diet. And what the direct study was more compliant for the reason, as I said, that most of the food was provided to them. So they got the stuff for free, and so that's what they ate mostly. Obviously, people would have cheated. Humans are not controlled. They're not in labs. But after that, pretty much that whole thing died off. Now you only see the so-called keto low-carb diets done for a couple of months or a couple of weeks where there's no fat adaptation, deliberately to basically skew and mislead people.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, but that's what influenced me to sort of go down the pathway of low carb and then eventually get to carnivore.
So, how did you find the carnivore diet yourself? Like, did you find it through Baker, or did you find it, or you just naturally progressed? Yep.
Joe Rogan Baker, I watched the Joe Rogan and also the Petersons as well, and so I'm going, especially the thing. Also, I came across some other people that have basically had a lot of anecdotes and stuff like that, like Amber O'Hearn as an example with her bipolar. And I'm going, okay, on any other diet, you need medication to manage bipolar. And she's basically getting complete remission on a carnivore diet. And then on top of that, you've got, somebody like Michaela Peterson, who basically has these really extreme sort of symptoms of, juvenile arthritis and stuff like that, and it completely goes away.
Yeah.
And you go, there's something here in that. And then I basically started looking into the research of, the Inuit, the Maasai, all these people, and I'm going, why aren't we looking at this research? Because there was plenty around, ethnological stuff that had been done and all that, and I'm going, this has been hidden. Then I came across the research from the Maxplank Institute in Leipzig, Germany, that had done a lot of N15 data, like the isotope data. And so I realized, and then I started looking, researching different tribal communities, different populations on the N15 data, and then noticed, okay, there are remains from all over the world which actually show that super carnivory or hyper carnivory or super carnivory in interglacial periods and hyper carnivory in glacial periods, and these people are thriving. They don't seem to have any. The only sort of like stress fractures or things on their skeletal structure that actually shows is only when they have a deprivation of intake of food for a long period of time, due to starvation and stuff like that. Otherwise, they're very robust and healthy. And I'm going, how didn't I know this? Why didn't we know this? And that really not only rattled my cage, but angered me severely. And I'm unapologetic in my criticism of both the medical and scientific community, because a lot of them are crackpots and, corrupt individuals that are taking money to cause harm to people. And it's disgraceful. And it should stop.
Absolutely. And it's the education system as well, like it's just as bad, and that's, all contributes to these corrupt and just ignorant people as well. But you're right, like there's so much that, a lot of people will tell us, oh, the carnivore diet's a fad, and like they think it's a new thing. But like you said, you have a look at the Inuit studies, like of Wilhelm Stephenson. He did a lot of work up there with them before they started eating the Western diet, or the standard Western diet. And, years, or you look at the Civil War in America, the siege of Alexandria, France, and Paris is now horse meat. It's so popular. This is nothing new. There's so many studies and
take a look at scurvy.
Yeah,
I mean, Napoleon cured his troops with cooked meat.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and
that's
people
exactly
don't
right.
realize. People don't realize that meat has. I mean, we talk about ascorbic acid, but when you cook meat, the ascorbic acid goes to practically zero. It gets converted to dihydroascorbic acid.
Right.
That's what we're actually consuming. It's a different. It's a breakdown metabolite that we actually absorb, and we don't have to absorb it requiring insulin through GLUT4 like the Vagoons eating their kibble. Well, we actually the transporter is GLUT1, and it actually also gets stored in the endoplasmic reticulum of all mammals, tightly stored. That means you can't get it out of there unless enzymes release it. So we can eat it, take it, absorb it through GLUT1, store it based on requirements, physiological requirements, into the endoplasmic reticulum around the actual nucleus, then convert it back to ascorbic acid when we need it on a demand-driven cycle. So we don't need high circulating vitamin C, because high circulating vitamin C, the body doesn't like as a metabolite. So what does it do? It basically, because it's reactive, it basically, because if it loses an electron, it becomes reactive.
Right.
So it has to convert it to oxalate and get rid of it.
Yeah.
So it's not a good idea. But if you're on a high carbohydrate diet and you're activating GLUT4, obviously that you have to get it as ascorbic acid. That's why the whole myth of ascorbic acid and the complete ignorance of dihydroxyascorbic acid is ignored completely.
Yeah.
For the simple reason that we don't understand these different metabolites of vitamin C.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many processes in the body that's just like all going all at once, and it's a really they have a really narrow scope when they do these studies as well. It's like, oh, this has this effect on this particular item, sort of thing. Sorry?
I call it reductionist syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. It's
That's what
very
they
much
suffer.
A reductionist view. And you're right. Like on a high carbohydrate diet, they keep feeding themselves, I've got to get as much vitamin C as I can. They don't realize, like you said, the excess vitamin C becomes oxalate, and you can't get rid of it all. So you get oxalate damage in your body and things like that. So, it's crazy. Just crazy ignorance, really is. And yet, like a lot of the people that we're talking about, that are so ignorant when it comes to nutrition, so-called qualified dietitians and nutritionists and so on. It's crazy. What an education system. My God.
Yeah, well, if you're going to be making money off people's suffering, you need it. You need an education system which is ignorant of physiology and has this reductionist mode of thinking, so people can't connect the dots. People like me who come more from, because my field is more of an engineering base. That's it comes from that. You're basically looking at data, and you're looking at information from a more holistic approach, and looking at the relationships between different things. You see it as a system. You don't see it as individual processes.
Yeah,
it's a dynamic system, the body, and if you don't recognize that, you'll misunderstand what's happening.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, people just keep looking at one little process rather than the whole system working together.
Insulin is not the problem. It's where it's being expressed, in which receptor sites. If you eat protein from an animal source protein, what is it going to do? It's actually going to, the insulin is going to go to which receptor sites? Due to leucine. Leucine has a signaling effect in the body, and the body goes, okay, we've got protein coming in, building blocks to build tissue. What is it going to do? It's going to activate the insulin receptors in the musculoskeletal, not in the fat cells. What actually activates insulin in the fat cells? Sugar.
Exactly.
We know it.
Yeah.
So stop talking about that insulin resistance or insulin is a bad thing. Tell me where it's being expressed, and I'll tell you whether it's bad or not in the way it's actually operating.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no, your body doesn't work against itself. It reacts to what you feed it, basically.
Precisely.
So, it's just common sense, really, isn't it?
Very much
But
so.
unfortunately, there's not much of that around these days, so it's not really that common.
No.
Yeah. So what? I mean, what drives you? I mean, you've it's been what 15 years since you've had your heart attack. Have you had any episodes since then?
No.
No. So
And
what's your
the
heart
last
health
time I actually checked was 2019, and I did a scan at the time. They found that I had serofibrosis, so something that's not supposed to happen in the heart. You're not supposed to get serofibrosis in the heart. Once you've had a heart attack, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
The other thing also that there was normal blood perfusion through the heart, so, a lot of that. And also I had, like, on my left lung, I had like severe glassing. Now, I don't know whether that was due to post-operative or what exactly caused it, but I had severe glassing in the left lung. And when I actually did my scan, 2019, what they found was it had actually reduced to, I think, I can't remember, but it was below 20%. It was either 18 or 19%. So most of it had actually resolved, and I suspect it's probably now zero because my lung capacity is now far better. So I could actually jog from the ground floor all the way to the 9th floor in the building and back down again, and do that twice. So before I couldn't hardly get up one flight of stairs. So, the difference is very pronounced in that regard. But
that's an incredible difference.
I've given up with the medical system, as you can understand. I don't bother. Why waste money? Why waste time zapping myself with radiation just to confirm what I already know, that I'm getting better and healthier? And I'm 59. My skin is, you can see how, tight my skin responds back and all that. I'm much healthier.
That's the thing. You can feel it.
Exactly. Why do I need to zap myself to prove it?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
right.
So I've walked away from that whole thing because I don't see it. And my father's also suffered from the system itself as well. Let's say, with the contraindicated sort of stuff that I told him not to do, but I nearly lost my job over it. But Dad, for some bloody reason, was convinced by other people that it was the way to do, because, the fear of death in older people. So he got sucked into it.
Exactly right. I mean, I was the same. As soon as that came out, I was warning people. I warned everyone in my family, but a few of them took it.
No, we know it actually suppresses the immune system.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
John Campbell and a few other people, he gets a lot of people on his channel, academics who are willing to speak the truth. And he's, they've quite clearly provided evidence from research and some of their own work on many of their own clients or patients, that they, what's actually happening to the immune system. And what we've seen even in the United States with people using a method of clearing out the spikes and stuff like that, that they're able to improve their immune function.
Yeah.
And T cells, guys, are what actually kill off cancer cells.
Yeah.
So you've got to strengthen, you've got to get your vitamin D levels up to the therapeutic levels. You've got to clean up your diet, and reduce deuterium exposure. And that was a big revelation for me probably about a decade ago when I came across Laszlo Boris, the academic from the UCLA, who was a Hungarian, that sort of opened my eyes, and I realised, okay, now I know why I had cardiovascular disease. I used to cook everything practically in seed oil. For 2 decades, I just basically, most of my food was fried.
Yeah.
And now I get it why I end up in my mid-40s with, CBD.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a big difference, between frying in tallow and seed oils. Seed oils, like you were talking about
Precisely.
deuterium, seed oils are the highest content of deuterium. They're like over
Yeah.
the charts.
Not good for the mitochondria.
No. So, I mean, what drives you to study so much, like to research all this so much? Like it's something innate in you, or?
I have this personality quirk, or I don't know, disorder, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what it is. I had it as a youngster. I could sit, and even though I'm not a bookworm by nature, as a youngster, I was sort of academically average, nothing special, anything like that. I loved playing, soccer and getting out and cycling and doing all the regular things and, fighting with other kids and whatever else. But for whatever reason, when I was living in Greece, I was exposed to my the culture of my parents, and in that sort of society, learning is really important. Intellectual sort of pursuits is really important in that culture. So I embraced it. I felt like a dummy. So I overcompensated by getting in situations where I was reading 7 books per week. I
Wow.
was just basically consuming at a rapid rate. And I think you can only do that because you really want to. You have to really want to do it.
Yeah.
I've realized you can't learn anything unless you really want to do it. It's a psychological thing. It has nothing to do with ability. It's just you do it because you want to. It's like you've got an insatiable hunger to understand things, and you're upset because you don't. And especially when, as a youngster, you get belittled by others. That played a bit of a role as well. I've sort of discarded my ego, as Carl Jung would basically say it nowadays, and sort of operating more on the closer to the self. But back then, as a youngster, more ignorant, I tended to, we're more fiery as young people, and less sensible in some other respects. It's probably why we make good child soldiers, because we've got that mentality of thinking we're immortal or whatever else. But I pretty much have that mindset, and when I get a challenge that you could say, I mean, getting close to death in your mid-40s sort of is a big challenge, sort of a big motivator to find out what the hell went wrong and why, this happened to me. And so doing a deep dive, and I'm not happy with simple explanations. For me, I need to know why. I don't know what it is about me. It's just my mentality. I need to understand things, and I've been like that, reading philosophies, physics, and all sorts of things throughout my life. I have
Not
an
knowing is
addiction to
frustrating,
understand.
though. Hmm.
What's that?
And not knowing is frustrating. When you get, like you were saying, like
Yeah,
when you get simple answers from doctors. Like when I was diagnosed, it was always like there's no knowing why. It just happens. It's genetics, and that was the same answer. It's like it's just too simple. There's no. They just don't know, obviously, but
yeah,
that drives you nuts. Because it's
it
like,
does. It does.
yeah,
Especially the personality that you probably have as well, because most people that um, come to the realization about how wrong the sort of narrative is, it's people with a specific type of personality, which we tend to be less conformist, which I have always been in my life. And also we tend to be more mavericks in our personality, the way we view the world. We're more cynical. We have these certain personality traits, and they are the things that drive us to understand what's happening. Most of the population doesn't have that requirement. That's why they will take the pill and go on. We don't do that. It's a personality trait, and it's a minority personality trait. And I think I'm just lucky that I had that, and I was able to, that drive, that personality drive allowed me to uncover. Plus, my analytical skills that I acquired from a young age, my teen years I was writing for magazines back when I was 15, really, from a young age and really got into this sort of stuff from 14. So I was not your usual kid, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's pretty impressive. Yeah. So when you have a really like a real analytical sort of background, it's like a simple answer like that it won't do. It's not enough, and it really is frustrating, honestly, when they just don't know, and they're supposed to be the experts, So
supposedly,
supposedly. Well, I just think that honestly they're just drug pushers and like they're experts on these drugs, basically, and that's about exactly
the DOS.
Yeah, and I find there's no real incentive for them to cure anyone either. But they're just as if you look at it from Big Pharma, obviously they want return customers, but so do the doctors. If you're just in the
doctors
door,
are trapped.
Yeah. Well,
because they go into it with, I want to save people, I want to help people and all that. And then they realise I've got a massive mortgage, I've got a massive debt.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And if I don't follow the guidelines, I'm out the door. What am I going to do? So they are trapped.
Somewhat. But when you're dealing with people,
there's a difference between some. Some basically will, let's say, go to the edge without going over it, and mention things to people and say, this is what I need to tell you as required, but this is what I'm doing, and I think it's far better because I've had good results. You may want to try it. I can't recommend it to you, but you may want to try it. Those sort of doctors are few and far between. Most will, due to fear, will follow the guidelines, even though they may be doing something completely different themselves.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much fear though. Too, I think a lot of it's just ignorance as well, and lazy too. Like they think that they've got their doctorate now, they know everything, and they don't bother looking, they don't bother researching anything afterwards.
The arrogance of the expert.
Like that. Yeah, a lot of people are like that though. They finish uni and that's it. That's all they need to know. But unfortunately, it's just not. Just doesn't work very well.
No. Most people don't understand that university gives you about 10 to 20%, depending on what degree you do. And then after that, most of it, 80% plus, is really hands-on in your field. That's where you're going to learn most things. So, I
agree.
And some people understand this. Some people don't want to understand this. See, when you come into a field like mine and you've just come out of university, you realise very quickly when you're interacting with a person like me or others that have been doing it for 30 years that you basically don't know nothing. Yeah. And you need to be mentored by people like me. That's what I do, especially now towards the twilight years of my career as they're coming to an end. So, but a doctor, on the other hand, just goes to his own clinic or to some practice and basically then just practices and thinks that, it has 2 books with him. One on pharmacokinetics to work out, what interactions between the different pharmaceuticals. Now it's online. You can actually get a pharmacokinetic sort of database or the book. Yeah. And the other one is the pharmaceuticals, all the different medicines that exist.
Yeah.
And pretty much that's how they operate. It's a very reductionist, very and it's probably the reason why most people end up with a bag full of meds after a couple of decades with their GP.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. The longer you're with a doctor, the more
MD in the
medication
US.
you have. Yeah, that's just the way it goes. So I know, like, you've got your channel is called No BS Nutrition, right? I know you've got a lot of different playlists, and a lot of them talking about different diseases, diabetes and cancer, like we touched on just before. Let's talk about some of the benefits of the carnivore diet when it comes to healing in general, and how does it relate to diseases like cancer?
Well, the one of the key things that people don't understand is we have, like, if you look at Thomas Seyfried's work in particular when it comes to cancer, he's right in terms of that fuels in particular, like glucose, lactate, glutamate, these sort of things are providing the key critical fuels for most cancers. But he's also ignorant about other cancers that actually will use fat, and even some rare ones that use ketones. So to say that basically, a low carb diet is the only strategy to employ shows a level of ignorance. But he's actually fallen into that trap because, again, the reductionist thinking exists even amongst academics like himself. The reductionist thinking makes him, where he's done the experiments where he's taken out healthy mitochondria, put them in cancer cells, no issue there. They can even reproduce. Then he's taken cancerous nucleus, put it into a healthy cell. You don't basically get any cancer. Then mitochondria that are damaged into a healthy cell, and you basically get it to go cancerous, as an example. And while he's worked out the mechanism of what's happening, the mitochondria that are damaged are sending signals to the nucleus and say, we're damaged, we can't operate properly. So what does the nucleus do? It wraps itself around with these long, elongated fatty acids, which are 22 carbon long, to protect the nucleus, upregulate certain oncogenic pathways, and then initiate certain old programs to increase the level of lactate. So it will actually draw in, whatever resources it can produce to produce lactate, and then shuttle that lactate back to the liver to turn it into new glucose. And then voila, you've got, people that are basically showing much higher and higher levels of glucose in the bloodstream that have got cancer. That's what lights up. That's why they see this. So that's just the cancer cell getting the resources that it needs to survive. Okay, so that's nothing. Okay, you've proven exactly some of the mechanisms, but what you haven't proven is why the mitochondria are in such a mess. Well, they're in such a mess for two reasons. One is due to extreme oxidative stress from a lot of reactants, which you'll get from inappropriate foods. And then the other thing is the high deuterium that's damaging the ATPase and preventing you from producing sufficient ATP to support the cell's viability, to maintain the cell's viability, because the ATP that's produced by these organelles called mitochondria goes into the cytosol, and there are organelles that take it up that actually do reparative work. And so if you don't have healthy mitochondria and you can't produce enough, you can't maintain a cell. And the cell then shifts from a normal cell to a senescent cell, which means damaged. That means less viable. And usually the immune system then, when there's a senescent cell, the cell will actually transmit CD38 and go cytokines and say, kill me, kill me, kill me. And then the immune system, the T lymphocytes, will come in and go, you're dead. They'll knock it out of existence. They'll wipe it out. Or certain metabolites, could, like senolytics, can force it to go into apoptotic, to self-death, in a sense, like fisetin as an example, which is a strategy that I recommend to people. So, and having it at night because it amplifies with melatonin, and because it's a fat-soluble polyphenol, it amplifies up to, I think it's about 680% compared to having it in the daytime. So you've got to have it at night, at 9 o'clock, when your melatonin starts rising, because you're going to get the best senolytic effect from that. And I do cover it in one of my videos about exactly how to use fisetin in that regard, and some of the earlier ones, exactly how it works and some of the mechanisms, some of the differences between senolytics. But what is missing by a lot of these people is understanding these mechanisms that you've got problematic due to deuterium. And now you've got another school over here, which is Laszlo Boris's school, that, let's use deuterium depletion to reduce basically the amount of deuterium inside the body. So we're trying to dilute it, lower it down in the body in order to basically allow the mitochondria to start functioning and repairing and improving themselves. What it misses is, and this is where is the deuterium depletion, you get what is called deuterium depletion resistance. That means beyond a certain level, it doesn't work, because what they're doing is they're missing a key step. Yes, you've worked out again the mechanism of damage.
Every morning we make choices. What to eat, how to move, how to live. But what if the smallest choice, something as simple as a supplement, could help your body rebuild, restore, and thrive? Our bodies are incredible machines, constantly working to repair and renew. But modern life, stress, diet, aging can slow that process down. That's where science meets nature. Cerule, a biotech pioneer, has spent decades researching how to support your body's natural systems. Stem Enhance Ultra, backed by clinical studies, boosts your body's release of stem cells, helping repair and renew tissues. Plasma Flow supports healthy circulation, delivering nutrients where they're needed most. And Cyactive balances inflammation, clearing the path for your body to heal. Sarah and Mark didn't always feel this way. Like many of us, they felt the weight of fatigue, aches, and stress. But they discovered a way to support their bodies from within. Choosing a healthier path isn't just about making a single decision. It's about embracing a lifestyle that supports your well-being every day. With Cerule, you're not just taking supplements. You're making a commitment to your health journey. Cerule's products aren't just supplements. They're a commitment to extraordinary health. Made from natural ingredients like Klamath algae and spirulina, they're designed to work with your body, not against it. For Sarah, it's energy to keep up with her day. For Mark, it's recovery to stay active. For both, it's a step toward a longer, healthier life. Backed by years of research, patents, and a mission to build extraordinary lives, Cerule is changing how we think about wellness. Small choices, big impact. Start with one capsule, one step toward vitality. With Cerule, you're not just living, you're thriving. Ready to feel extraordinary? Visit dcfit.cerule.com to discover Stem Enhance Ultra, Plasma Flow, and Cyactive, your partners in wellness.
Damaging the ATPase, but what you're missing, which is fundamental, and this is the problem with reductionist thinking, that both these academics suffer, what you're missing is that you need to repair this sort of stuff. What repairs the electron chain and all the sort of structures inside? It's not only reducing the level of deuterium coming in to stop the damage. You need to then repair them. So when you repair them, what you do is you can shift them back from a cancerous state to a senescent state. That can happen.
Okay.
And then you need a good, well-functioning immune system to kill them off.
Yeah.
So it's multi, you have to think in this system thinking, all these components coming together. You need to support all these pathways and all these components that actually allow it to work. Because what actually helps within the mitochondria to repair, most people don't realize the mitochondria can produce their own melatonin. Melatonin heals. Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's not only from the exactly, and it's everybody thinks of pituitary gland, and all about the night stuff, and circadian rhythms and all that. Yeah, but that's for the cells, cell signaling and all that. But there's the mitochondria, a separate little organelle that actually is independent of that sort of relationship. They actually require melatonin, and taurine is a thing that actually you can get from animal foods, you can't get from plant foods, that actually increases melatonin and also reduces oxidative stress, allowing the healing of the mitochondria.
Right.
So, and also allows, fusion of mitochondria and a number of other processes that help improve the viability of the mitochondria. Now, obviously, even if you rebuild certain mitochondria and, are able to shift the actual cell back into a senescent state, and that will signal back to the nucleus and say, look, we don't need to be running those programs, so it down-regulates the oncogenes from that signaling because it's actually getting sufficient energy, but it's still in a sort of a zombie state, or as some people call it, a senescent state, which can't cell divide, but it's in a sort of a state. These sort of unviable cells need to be removed, so most, because they're also producing cytokines, and if your immune system isn't strong enough to get them out, they will continually increase the amount of cytokine signaling.
Yeah.
There is an association that these cytokines can cause damage to the neighboring cells. I'm not sure. I don't subscribe to that theory, but I don't know whether it does or it doesn't, because it hasn't been proven. It's an association that, okay, there are other cells, but we know that other cells being unviable in usually clusters in certain areas are due to, that there's been damage in that area. So it may be just related rather than being due to the cytokines. But if that's the problem, we need to basically, deal with that problem. Now, obviously, you've probably heard people out there promoting the longevity space, NAD. I don't. I say that you should never get above the sort of 300 that should be your highest level in terms of things like niacin or NAD type, like M&M and NAD plus type fusions or whatever. I don't subscribe to them. I believe that high doses of any metabolites of vitamin B3 can be problematic. They can interfere with gluconeogenesis. They can interfere with a whole lot of other processes, metabolic processes in the body. Our body's not designed to be in these high dosing. They have side effects and all sorts of problems. Plus, the biggest problem is, especially if you've got cancer, what is it doing? It's basically having this sort of slight suppressive effect on CD38 signaling. So it's actually having an effect that potentially could be masking a cell that's unviable. It needs to be removed by the immune system, and it's not actually now transmitting because CD38 goes down when there's more NAD in these cells, these zombie cells. So what happens is the signaling isn't happening, and these things can shift into a cancerous state again if they get further damaged or degrade. So there is a problem with recommending this sort of stuff that a lot of the longevity gurus who are thinking in reductionist terms and don't understand the interactions and relationships of these different metabolites and signaling molecules, and are missing some of these things because they see things within their sort of tunnel vision sort of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy that the nutrition space, or just the fitness space and the health, fitness industry and so on. It's just ridiculous, honestly. Like you said, like it's a real reductionist sort of viewpoint. Eat blueberries. That you'll live longer. It's always the same. It's crazy. And all right, so carnivore diet. So you think that it's not just about low carb?
No, it isn't.
It's just
it's the nutrients in the carnivore diet. You've got a whole lot of metabolites that you're getting from it that have a lot of effects throughout the body.
Right.
And really the thing that we've looked at a lot of when we look at both animal models and some human studies that have looked at older people that have got much better musculoskeletal health, people that have basically got, even the Framingham study, 30-year epidemiological study on people, those who had the highest cholesterol, 93% were still alive after 30 years, where those who had the lowest cholesterol, only 73% were still alive. I know which group I'd like to be part of. So, that just destroys that whole narrative, because that's an inverse relationship, which means their hypothesis fails the Bradford-Hill criteria of epidemiology. So they can basically stick that.
There's a lot of that too. I mean, if you have a look at the average meat consumption by population, it's gone down since the 50s.
Precisely.
I mean, it just keeps going down, yet the disease keeps going up. So like it's a reverse correlation. It's completely
exactly.
Yeah,
precisely. If you take a look at America, for instance, the United States had like half the population that it has today.
Yeah.
And it had more more beef livestock. Yeah. It had about 10% more beef livestock than it has today.
Yeah.
So so even that's less than half. And remember, some of this stuff isn't even being consumed in America anymore. Even the current production, a lot of it's actually going to China and elsewhere, being exported. So there's actually even the consumption isn't half what it was in the 70s. It's even less than half, like probably a quarter or 30%.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's dismally low.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's an extremely low percentage of actual. I mean, the standard Western diet basically is plant-based, percentage-wise. And you can see there's a real correlation. The more plants we eat or seem to consume, especially plant-based oils and so on, the more disease we get. Not that correlation is causation, but
obviously.
Yeah. There you go.
But at least we can discount. We can show quite clearly that it has nothing to do with animal foods, and that at least we can say back in the 50s and 60s, because of lack of refrigeration, which is very important because we didn't have refrigeration back then. We had seasonal fruits and vegetables. The cost of transport was much higher, so we mostly ate domestically. Most things, other than grains that got exported, but all the rest of the plants were basically domestically produced seasonally. We know quite clearly that the majority of the diet was made up of, animal foods back then, and people were healthier. And even the so-called blue zone of Loma Linda, well, they don't cover that anymore because it's more plant-based now. But back in the 50s. Even Gundry, I did a video on Gundry and his, about the blue zones. There's a video in the blue zone playlist, and it's Gundry, and he actually talks about it quite openly, that when he went to Loma Linda, the so-called vegetarian diet was 50% dairy, That's what the nutritionists were basically providing. So all those epidemiological studies back then were basically on a diet which was more animal based. So it was dairy, and the rest of it was things like eggs and fish. And as Bart showed in one of the studies, he actually showed that they had actually adjusted. It's called fabrication, where when you take away the adjustment and look at the raw data, it's the inverse relationship. The people that consume more animal foods lived longer based on the 1950s study. And we know back then that more than 50% of that diet was dairy based. Everybody poo-poos dairy and thinks that it's, the worst thing and all that. No, when you combine dairy with a whole lot of other crap that creates leaky gut, and stomach acid insufficiency, and then you've got all these foreign proteins going in through your gut permeability, then all these things become a problem and you react to all sorts of things. But that's not the same as basically having a healthy gut where you have less processed and crappy stuff in your diet. So stop blaming something that's not causing the problem, because dairy wasn't the problem until we got to the modern era where we deranged our guts to such a level that they don't function properly anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, that whole blue zone, that's such a crock of BS. It really is, it's amazing how much they push that lie. I mean, it's just a flat out lie. I spent 10 years in Japan, and like every year they do just epidemiological sort of surveys, and Okinawa always comes up as the worst prefecture for health outcomes. And like they keep toting Okinawa eats sweet potatoes, and like after the war they did because they had nothing else. That didn't have meat. But I mean they eat so much meat and seafood, and they all do. Like Japan loves it, and nose to tail as well. Like if it's ever had a parent or moved at some stage, they eat it in Japan, and if it doesn't move, they'll push it just to make sure.
I mean, I can tell you from my great grandfather. Having a chat with Dad, he hated vegetables, and he was basically just in the mountains. There was no roads back then, so you couldn't even get grains up there for bread in most cases. So it was pretty much, mostly animal based, and he loved, goat meat was his favourite, and they had many heads of goat. I mean, I've basically, my auntie, Dad's sister, she had goats, and I used to go in the summer time up to the mountains, and I'd take on the goats also for out to pasture. So I know how to handle goats in that regard. So I've had experience as a youngster, and I know what these people in the mountains eat, and it's not what the nutritionist bullshit that comes across. And my great grandfather that lived to 107 consumed goat meat and goat and dairy. Yeah. And I know the Maasai consume dairy and goat meat primarily. They don't consume beef. That's only when the animal gets very old. It's mostly goats that they actually consume, and I actually show that in that video on the Maasai. So a lot of the problem is you've got idiot academics that go to these countries and don't really do proper observation, and they miss so many things, and they think because I'm the expert, I know best, and they have made their mind up about things, and they go back and actually just say the same dribble and nonsense, like Saladino with his
checking it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Saladino is a prime example of an MD that goes there, and as at Mary Ruddock that I spoke to, he was there basically for about a day or two and then racked off and then went back to the US telling them how honey is great. Really? Yeah. Paul, really? Are you kidding? She actually stayed there, and she went out with these people and realised that these people only seasonally have honey. They don't have it. They just give it to the tourists. They'll go in and grab it and provide it for them, but it's only a seasonal thing that they do. and they have some seasonal tubers, but the majority of the time is they have animal foods, and their favourite is the baboons, and especially the brains of them, which is very high in cholesterol and fats and stuff like that, which is one of their favourite things of the baboon. So I mean,
I think like even in India, which is now mostly vegetarian, like before
dairy rich.
Yeah, before British colony though, they were very big meat eaters, and monkey brains was like a delicacy there as well. Like
True.
So yeah, that wasn't the whole vegetarian diet wasn't even introduced to them until the British occupation. So
exactly, in the South in particular.
Yeah, such a scam.
But even there, they consumed a lot of like dairy products plus ghee, which they produced for all their cooking fat.
Yeah.
Since they introduced now, most fats that are consumed in the subcontinent are primarily seed oils, 85% or more.
Yeah.
And diabetes and cardiovascular disease and all the diseases of civilization, as Western Day Price would call them, have gone through the roof in India.
Yeah, that's actually when I was talking to Dr. James Muki about that. Actually, he was, like India's sort of touted as the great vegetarian sort of society sort of thing, but they've got the highest rate of diabetes in the world.
Precisely.
It's crazy. And diabetes being the basis for most sort of heavy diseases afterwards. So it's crazy.
But even before the actual era, there was an epidemiological study done by the British on the this was with some of the local academics as well, which did on the train drivers or the staff that actually operate the train system, and those who came from the south had more health problems and lived less years compared to the people who came from the north who are more pastoral and ate more animal foods. So it was quite clear even there in just that epidemiological study, which you could say that's a sort of a population that hasn't been exposed to too many foods of civilization, that basically did, that was eating more traditional foods, or as people would say, whole foods.
Yeah, exactly. And like another actually talking to Dr. Ballasted, like 95% of the world's vegetarians are so because of economic reasons, not because of any philosophical reasons. They just don't have access to the meat, so they just eat what they can to survive.
Precisely.
At the time. So,
and because they also undereat, they're also shorter in stature because they've got less protein coming in, building blocks. But on top of that, because they also undereat, they get some benefits from that undereating of these carbohydrates, because their body has an ability. When you're undereating, you're going to be less inflamed.
Yeah, well, you get like fasting benefits and things like that. So,
it's forced on you out of necessity.
Yeah, right. They've got no choice, really. But the fact that it's just crazy that the West is choosing to do this, and a lot of it. I mean, not so much. I think it's through manipulation rather than real choice. We sort of manipulated education. Yeah, exactly. But speaking of Salad Boy, what do you think of? Recently, I've been seeing a lot of pop-ups of people on this sugar diet. So, do you have an opinion on that at the moment?
Well, the problem is that, let's take it from a historical perspective. We know that even in the tropics, you only had 2 seasons of sugar available. Yeah. We're talking about wild plants here. We're not talking about domesticated plants that you can grow all year round because they've been hybridized and they've been made in such a way that you can actually get a lot of productivity out of them. We're talking about wild plants now. Wild plants, there's very few viable plants that are safe in the wild. Most of them are poisonous, unless there is a specialized animal that knows how to deal with that poison. The majority are some berries, certain fruits, and certain tubers that are only seasonally available for a short period of time in the year. And even the tubers are very fibrous. And some of the plants like watermelon, anybody seen a watermelon? In Africa, it's like a tennis ball in your hand. That is the watermelon, and it's mostly fibrous with only very little fructose in it.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of you're more getting a hydration of the fluids and a bit of sweetness, and that's about it. So it's not food. It can't substitute for other food, you know. So when you look at it from that perspective and the seasonality, which was very short, the time frame, and you take out the domesticated stuff. If sugar was the primary fuel, we would have died out as a species.
Oh, for sure.
So that's complete and utter nonsense. It has no basis. Even simple common sense would tell you, based on that knowledge of archaeological knowledge, would tell you that this is impossible to be the primary source of food that fuels the body.
Yeah.
Especially when gluconeogenesis exists. And a gluconeogenesis, you know, I mean, for instance, you would require for glycolysis, which is, you know, the inside your body to break down, you know, those sugar molecules to basically get them all the way down to pyruvate and then into the Krebs cycle to be able to be oxidized. This process, there's quite a lot of energy involved in it. There's something like Gibbs free energy. I think it was 29. I forget the sort of the figure, how it's computed. Off the top of my head, I'm just having a bit of a brain fog moment. I must have eaten a vegetable. And the thing is, you know, when it comes to gluconeogenesis, it's a hydrolysis process. That means you go through these. You basically bring in the precursors into the mitochondria, like glutamate, for instance, and then it goes into the mitochondria, then comes out into the actual cytosol, and there is these steps, enzymatic steps, and they're all hydrolysis based. That means you practically, the amount of energy used is nearly zero in terms of Gibbs free energy that comes out of that process. So it's a very easy process to produce with very little. There's no stress on the body. It's nothing to do with that. And the amount of requirements, it's not energetic at all to produce glucose from that process. And the other thing is, people say, well, cortisol is raised as a process. Actually, no. When you're fat adapted, the only time cortisol actually raises is, like with every human, is the dawn effect.
Yeah.
To rapidly, to signal, exactly, it's a signaling molecule that tells the body to wake up and also get free fatty acid out there and glucose production up and running to get the body going. It's telling the body it's wake up time. Get the additional energy out there because the muscles are going to be moving and those muscles need energy to basically function and all that in a much higher energetic state that you are from sleep. That's all it is. And so it happens in everyone, whatever diet they're on. The difference is, obviously, cortisol needs to be suppressed by insulin, which it does, but that's because you've got a boatload of glucose that comes in, and it needs to tell, because that's the normal. The body's smart and goes, I don't need gluconeogenesis. I need to suppress that. I need to tell cortisol to stop basically doing that. But people are getting confused between being on a fruitarian diet where you may have actually ripped through your fat stores and now you've got high cortisol, and people are going, oh, I've got high cortisol, what's wrong with me? Well, you idiot, what's happening is you're wasting away your tissue, and that high cortisol signaling is basically saying, I need to waste away this tissue to preserve my brain, my heart, and all the other organs and whatever else. We don't understand. It's not pathological. It's not being bad. It's telling the body, for survival reasons, we need to sacrifice certain tissue for others. But if you were basically getting enough energy in, you wouldn't have that problem at all. You'd be providing enough energy for the body to function. So these are just signaling molecules. They don't mean that they have, depending on the circumstances, the relationships that they're actually involved at whatever time based on the inputs that are coming in to the body, they will signal appropriately. That's all they do.
Yeah.
They're basically saying, you need to convert this because we need this amount. Or you need to suppress this. We don't need you to produce glucose. And the only time glucose goes up is in a what we call the construct of insulin resistance, which is really a severe Randall cycle activation, which then the body gets confused and it's in a mess, and it's going, and then it basically insulin no longer is working properly, and cortisol's trying to compensate to basically produce the sugar that these starving cells. But the problem is the body's being deranged because of inappropriate foods that are coming in.
Exactly.
But that's because normally the body wouldn't have to live under these circumstances, because in a traditional society, you basically didn't have this level of influx of food energy.
Yeah.
It's only a modern thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a very recent modern thing.
Exactly. Stop confusing derangements with certain foods.
Yeah.
But you should, and the lack of understanding of the Randall cycle is what creates this misunderstanding, and then people use reductionists to blame cortisol for everything or insulin for everything or whatever else.
It's crazy what they keep going on about cortisol. I've got to reduce stress, stop stress. They literally stress about reducing their stress. It's crazy,
And guess what actually lowers cortisol? Actually, a carnivore diet will actually produce, one, it will furnish the precursors to produce taurine. And on top of that, also has taurine. And taurine, basically, what does it do? It lowers cortisol. But how does it lower cortisol? How does it do it? Well, it does it by basically at the mitochondria level, it's actually forcing pyruvate to go through rather than you end up generating too much lactate.
Yeah.
It suppresses lactate production.
All right.
And improves the efficiency of the mitochondria by about, at a maximum, potentially up to 30-odd%, and also with the Krebs cycle working more efficiently as well.
Yeah.
And that's how it's sort of, in that way, it's actually able to deal with that.
See, I think it's
people
all about
are not aware of this process, and so they look at studies that don't have a high enough animal food in them, and so they see these sort of derangements, and then they make all these funny conclusions, not realizing that if you had more of the animal foods, you'd be able to handle even the small amount of glucose much better, more efficiently.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And also be able to train for longer and work for longer, because humans back in the 50s and 60s and earlier, when they were eating more animal foods, they were able to produce more taurine, they were able to consume more taurine, and their own muscles were able to function and work for longer. That's how those guys were able to work for 10 or 12 hours in a day, where most people now, even half that, would exhausted and wouldn't be capable without a robot or a machine doing the work for them. The difference is that they were eating the animal foods that was giving them the ability to reduce the oxidative stress in their muscles. And we know that this works because bodybuilders use it to be able to train for longer. They use taurine.
Yeah.
So it's not as if it's not known, and the researchers that have done all the work, but most people are ignorant about that relationship. You ask any MD about taurine, and they'll look at you funny, like you told them you were telling them something about aliens or whatever. They've got no idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, it's crazy. You have a look at like you said, I think it's all about hormone production. If your hormones are working on time, like all through the day, everything's going to work well. But you need those nutrients to do that. You need the nutrients from the carnivore diet to actually produce these hormones on time at the right time. And of course, there's other things like sunlight and things
There's
like that.
light signaling as well, which is important. So circadian rhythms and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I've got these 8 habits that I've got a video on 8 habits. Part of it's breath work. Some part of it's being out, being grounded, getting sunlight first thing in the morning, that sort of stuff. Melatonin in the evening, and so on. But what do you say to people who think that glucose, for example, produces hormones for them, and fruit juices give them electrolytes? I mean, it's crazy. They're insane.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
Look, the problem with most people is that, there's a lot of buffoonery out there and stuff like that. You have to go back to old research. How far back? 1930s. And, Walter Kempner did research back. Well, even before, but Walter Kempner did some really important studies in the 1930s. Unfortunately, he wasn't aware of the low-carb diet, the ketogenic diet being used at the time, in the United States. He was a Jewish academic who came out of Germany, and he was investigating different dietary approaches, sort of extreme dietary approaches, and he, had heard about the low fat diet at the time, and he went for an extreme version. He was the creator of what is called the rice diet, and so he's that guy, Walter Kempner. And so he got people on that, so disengaging the Randall cycle, but he realized that even when you disengage the Randall cycle, you do elevate slightly insulin, and insulin holds on to electrolytes and holds on to water. And he realized that if you basically put any other electrolytes in there, more of that sort of stuff, what's going to happen is you're going to hold on to more water, increase blood pressure.
Right.
So he immediately realized you have to lower that if you're eating, a purely high carbohydrate diet. And you can only sustain that for a certain period of time, like a year, because all these people lost their weight because they just tore down their tissue. But that's what happens, in that regard. And and you also clear up a lot of the, whenever you go low carb, low fat, extreme, you will disengage the Randall cycle, you'll lower the growth pathways, and you'll basically start recycling tissue and all that. But you can only do these fasting mimicking diets for so long. And Walter knew you could only probably sustain it for about a year or a bit more, and then you had to go back to a normal diet. Otherwise, you would basically get into really problematic state.
And
so he was well aware of that, and only used to recommend it.
Yeah, and people don't understand, like when they're talking about weight, they're talking about muscle tissue, bone tissue, and organ tissue as well. And
exactly.
When they go back to a normal diet and they start putting on fat because they're eating like the standard Western diet,
exactly,
and so on, and cereals and so on, they are much
engaging
weaker.
The Randall cycle.
Yeah. And they are much weaker. They have much less hormone production and so on. So they're getting fatter, carrying more weight with less strength to do it. So that is
And remember that when you go low fat, as well, people say, well, under those sort of circumstances, initially, the excess sugar, because he used to whip his clients to make sure, his patients, that they actually consume sufficient to prevent any severe wasting away. Wow. So, because that's why you see the vagoons, are constantly stuffing their faces to try and maintain their, get enough food energy in, because it's just not enough. In that regard, let alone the thirstiest buggery. Because remember, most people don't realize the whole of glycolysis, those 10 enzymatic steps, what are they doing? They're removing deuterium from high deuterium foods, which is what sugar is. That's what they're basically doing. So at the end, you've only got very few hydrogen ions and the, and the carbon backbone of this small molecule that then basically gets oxidized. That's what is actually, that's why you have to go through all those steps. where on the other hand, fat doesn't have to go through those steps. But this is the problem with fat, because fat normally would be from a low deuterium source, an animal source, traditionally. And it would come through beta oxidation and go through and get, the Krebs cycle stripping off all those hydrogens to basically create, to do the functions that it requires to produce ATP. Yeah. The downside, and also produce metabolic water, that's why you're less thirsty, because it produces 10% more. For 1 gram, you get 1.1 gram. With glucose, because you've stripped off all the extra deuterium that's there, what happens is you actually end up with about 0.44%. So you end up with a loss of within that food, the same volume, you end up with a loss of well over 60%, which means that you don't have enough hydration. That's why in a high carbohydrate diet, you tend to be thirstier and consume more water. On a low carb diet, once you get fat adapted and all that and produce metabolic water, you upregulate your antidiuretic hormones. And as a consequence of that, you can maintain and recycle all these, electrolytes and stuff like that, plus the taurine that's coming in from the animal food. When you eat sufficient protein, undereat, then you're in a problem. If you eat sufficient, the taurine that's actually acquired from the muscle tissue, that will basically, is an osmolyte. It regulates. It goes into the nephrons, into your kidneys, and actually regulates the recycling of water and electrolytes. And that's what happens. And the small insulin signaling that comes from that additional also provides appropriate signaling for that to happen. It's a perfect system. And then we derange it by putting in appropriate things in.
Yeah, it's a fantastic system. And like you said, I think when it comes to biochemistry, for example, people just get confused about because fat has a much longer molecule or chain of molecules. They think that it has more calories and makes you fat. But
photons you need.
Photons. So what it does though is it produces more ATP. It produces more EZ water, and therefore you get more CO2, which you then later release, which is how you get rid of fat mass. Whereas carbohydrates actually lowers your ATP production, and fructose in particular actually inhibits the production of ATP, and it also inhibits the electrolyte uptake. So,
well, remember fructose, and it's the reason why I say fruit is the worst carbohydrate you can consume, has higher levels of deuterium.
Exactly.
In the water in particular of the fruit. And because it's the plant concentrates deuterium in the fruit.
That's right.
It's a growth factor for the fruit. Okay? Yeah. This is why there's a relationship between, deuterium and cancer and growth pathways. Obviously, you still need for skeletal, in particular for bones, the highest concentration of deuterium is in the bones. It gives them rigidity. And this is where if you've had a lot of deuterium exposure and then you lose weight rapidly, not only do you do damage to your mitochondria, you can actually brain fog and feel really bad like I did and realize I just stuffed up my mitochondria and I then had to spend a decade trying to fix them, But on top of that, and that's why you should do deuterium depletion if you've been exposed to it quite a lot, and then lose the fat slowly as you're deuterium depleting at the same time, which is another important thing by eating more animal fat through that process and worrying less about, body composition and more about reducing the deuterium levels in your body, because you don't want to damage your mitochondria and end up an attractive corpse with cancer. Okay. So that has happened to a few people in the low carb community that rapidly lost their weight loss. They look good, but they end up getting cancer. And it wasn't due to their diet, but their past deuterium exposure, That ignorance is what basically can be fatal, because we're not basically living back in the 1950s and 60s. Even if you did high carbohydrate then, it was from sources that didn't have ultra high levels of deuterium. Now we're living in a food environment with a lot of seed oils which are not in the 150 range, which is what carbohydrates are, and that's 130 is the maximum. Plant oils like olive oil and stuff like that, or extra virgin, is about around the 130 ppm. Animal fats are below that in the 115 to 120 range. Grain one's 128. They're still in the safe zone, or 126. And the lowest end you don't want to go really below is 100. And the reason for that is because you still need a certain level of deuterium for the collagen structures to give them more rigidity and the bones more strength and more, because remember, your bones are mineralized collagen. So they have to be rigid and have good structure, and deuterium helps with solid, strong structures. Just consider it as an additive, additive to your bones, in a sense.
Right.
So it's really important to realise that seed oils, on the other hand, are over the 180 level, which is considered toxic for the mitochondria. They're up to, anywhere between 200 to 255 ppm, parts per million. It's extremely high. And these oils, because they're going through beta oxidation, the problem there is, with glycolysis, you've got the enzymes to strip off those because they always existed with the plants.
Yeah.
But here, through an industrial process, we've actually added deuterium to the fat. Yeah. And now it's going through a process that doesn't strip them off. Yeah. And that's where the major problem happens. You're getting both from the glucose source, and that's why in the past, if you notice people getting like slow mitochondrial damage compared to now from the low fat, a low fat diet or vegetarian diet or whatever. And the reason why it was happening is, and you can see to the population, everybody was thin. And then all of a sudden, people that were in their 70s or 80s and all that were less efficient, their mitochondria, in oxidizing things, and they stored. With even small amounts of mixed macros, they could actually be activating the Randall cycle much more rapidly. Why? Because they had less mitochondrial efficiency because of mitochondrial damage from the deuterium. And that is happening much earlier and earlier and earlier with every generation due to exposure of high seed oils and high refined carbohydrates, which are in the 160 ppm in many cases, especially the way they're processed. And now you've got the perfect storm to damage your mitochondria, reduce the ability to oxidize things, greater level in younger people of zombie cells or these senescent cells that are less efficient, and now you're activating the so-called construct of insulin resistance, which is really the Randall cycle, the inability to oxidize these things, and then you just keep on storing. You keep on storing. Right. And that's why the kids are getting so fat, unhealthy, with cancers and all sorts of problems and health problems.
Right. The rate of cancer now in children is astronomical, and childhood obesity the same. And like you're talking about, like brain fog as well, that fructose is directly responsible for brain fog as well. Because it
only had it seasonally.
This rights from your liver, this crosses the blood-brain barrier, and that gives you brain fog. But have a look at all processed foods. They have the combination. You get the glucose from.
Let me say something in defence of fructose. I'm a bit of a contrarian. I don't demonise fructose. I explain that it's not good all year round.
Yeah, exactly.
But it has some usefulness. In interglacial periods, when it was warmer, like we are now in the glacial period, in a glacial period, animals will have a lot of thick fat on them. So we'll get sufficient fat to basically provide food energy for our mitochondria, for our bodies. But in an environment where animals are leaner, you need more seasonal sugar. And the reason why you need that fructose from honey or fruit or whatever is because it deliberately sabotages your ability to oxidize, to energy in the mitochondria. And the great thing about that is you can put on body fat. Because just think, you're eating lean animals all year round. You should look at tribal people. They get, very low body fat, but then they seasonally build it up using fructose. So for them, living in that sort of food environment, it's helpful for them to basically rebuild body fat. And it's the same thing that animals that go to hibernate will eat shitloads of fructose for the same reason. And the same reason why in the Amazon, fish will come up and actually consume fruit in the 2 periods when the Amazon floods in order to use fructose to fatten up. That's the purpose of it. It has validity within a proper ancestral type environment. We don't live in that. We've basically littered the whole food supply with fructose and it's 24/7, 378, 365 and a quarter days every damn year. Add to that all the seed oil, the damaging effects of the mitochondria and reducing their efficiencies, and no wonder we're so sick and deranged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, for its purpose, like for 2 to 4 weeks before winter to fatten us up for the fast, it's perfect. It's exactly what it's supposed to do. But it's crazy what we're doing right now with these. And like I said, like there's combination of the seed oils, the fructose and sugars and carbohydrate, and everything's processed. It's just it's incredible. Anyway, mate, I think I've kept you for quite a while anyway, an hour and a half. So
that's okay. That doesn't matter.
Thanks for taking the time, mate. I really do appreciate it. I'd love to do this again sometime because you're just an absolute wealth of knowledge. I love your channel. But thanks very much. And for anyone who's listening, go check out Harry's channels, No BS Nutrition, and it is the real deal. So and you'll get straight answers too. Real answers with real detail.
I'll tell you one thing. I basically, for me, I wanted to learn how things work in my body. For me, it was survival. There's no monetary benefit for me. For me, it was pure survival. That how do I basically extricate from myself from potential death? And so I wasn't interested in what was fashionable, only what actually worked and what actually was correct. And so by these deep dives, I've come to the conclusion that an animal-based diet, or as close you can get to that, you're going to be a hell of a lot healthier than with a lot of this garbage sort of food that is, in particular, the garbage food is the worst. The standard diet of processed crap is going to kill you. It's what's killing the whole population and damaging them. And all they're doing is they're using meds to basically keep people going because it's a business, and the food industry is invested in the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical is invested in the food industry, and big tobacco manufacturers actually are invested in both, and they are the ones that brought some of their own methods of addiction into the food industry. And you have to understand this, and they basically don't care about us. They just want to make as much money and keep us alive as long to extract as many dollars as they can from us. It's an evil sort of cabal.
It's an evil system. It's an evil system. They've got us dying slowly enough that we think we're living, and that's the way they want to keep it. So anyway, another great talk. Thanks very much for that. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.